Welcome to No Sex, Please. I'm religious. For 2,000 years and more, religion has had its own way with sex. The greatest battle it has ever faced is how to control the masses who love it. And so began the story of shame and disgust and dishonour. Forget he who must be named, but never forget it that must always be kept undercover. Hi, we've got No Sex Please, I'm Religious. And today I have a wonderful guest, and her name is Maria Pallotta-Chiarolli. Now,
Beautiful, David.
Was that close?
Very beautiful. Very, very close. Very, like, spot on.
Oh, thank you very much. Maria, you've got such an amazing career, and the things that you've done as an advocate in the LGBTIQ community is extraordinary. Just tell us a bit about yourself and where this came from. Where did all your passion to help this queer community, and I'll use it in that term, all right? Queer, they're very queer.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many terms. It's something I reflect on all the time, and I need to say, David, the gratitude to be invited in to so many queer spaces as an ally is something
Wonderful.
that is with me all the time, and the responsibility and accountability that goes with that sits on my shoulders every
Yes.
day, and so it should. I think, well, it's got two beginnings, really. I come from a Southern European heritage, working very migrant, anti-fascist, dare I say I'm religious, no sex please, anti-Catholic because of the Lateran Treaty between Mussolini and the church.
Yes.
We had goddesses, so we were very much the witches and the naughty women of Italy. So I grew up with very feminist women who were stereotyped in Australia as very traditional and submissive, definitely not. And I also grew up with very pro-feminist men. My father, men who did not fit any of those horrendous mainstream stereotypes. So I came from a very critical, questioning heritage. And that's really important because I always say the university education actually just augmented that, but I already had it there. I grew up questioning everything, being encouraged.
Yes.
Then in the 80s, of course, as many of us of a certain age know, HIV arrived, the epidemic, and I began to lose friends. And I grew up, David, one of my best friends in little old Adelaide, who would have thought, was HIV positive and a gay teacher in a Catholic boys' school, the good old Christian Brothers school.
Yeah.
And it threw me into being a volunteer and really growing up and learning, look, if I'm going to take this into action, then get on with it. And I asked a lot of gay men at the time, and a lot of lesbians and LGBTIQA plus people in Adelaide, is there a place for me to say this? If not, tell me to go away. And they said at that time, David, there was a place, because unfortunately people were more likely to listen to a straight Italian mum, wife, than they would. So I was quite happy to be used strategically. And someone was a product of that. And so I think that's the beginning. And ever since then, it's been like just being invited in, hopefully keep gaining trust and credibility. But also my feminism, my working classness, the way I am puts me off and outside a lot of straight culture, heteronormative culture.
Yeah.
So I tend to find a lot of heteronormativity and traditional femininity stuff really cringy.
Yes. Yeah. I do understand that, and also that the putting people into different classes in society, into and even the very gender specific roles that people have had. It really is quite absurd. And
it is really, yeah. And I mean, a lot of my early work, which I did with Professor Wayne Martino, dear friend, who's now working in Canada, was around diverse masculinity. So there was that work being done. My family was always queer friendly. So I had, in the 70s and 80s, I had friends who came to my parents' place as a refuge to hang out, have drag parties. Yeah, we were doing drag parties before. Apparently, there's such a problem for children now, huh? But we were doing all of that in my mum's backyard with pizza and homemade wine.
Of course. And look, I mean, children have done this sort of thing, for millennia.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just crazy the stuff that's happening at the moment.
Yes. Yeah.
So now you're based at Pride Centre, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm with the I'm an ally to the Australian LGBTIQA plus Multicultural Council, AGMC, one of the
Yes.
founding ally members in 2004. And I'm kind of like the research lead, which because I'm a research nerd, and
Yes.
also am trusted with connections and all sorts of wonderful things. So I guess I've got different groups. Like there's that group. Then I'm an honorary deacon in the School of Communications, and
Wow.
that's a delight. That's just been extended, so I hope my brain and energy holds out for another 3 years. But I'm also very much involved. I work for Ananda Consultancy, Bodhisattvas
Yes.
training, so we do a lot of training and allyship. And finally, my Ascolta Women, which is Italian women's group where we are decolonising, critiquing our cultures, really doing a lot of good work. So that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And the crazy thing, the old story that we would get from our grandmothers, no matter what cultures we were in, or our grandfathers. This is the way things have always been. This is the way it should be.
Yeah.
And nobody
Yeah.
actually questions that until someone
Yes.
comes along like yourself and says, "Hang on, is this right or is this
Yeah.
wrong?"
And look, we've
Which
kind of been whitened in Australia, David. Like
yes, yes,
I love working with queer people of colour, youngins who go,
yeah,
you're white, you're not ethnic. And I'm like, well, in my day, we were the black Italians, So I find remembering, my grandmother couldn't read and write. She never went to school. My
sure,
mum cleaned the toilets and the offices I've been privileged to sit in. So
yeah,
I come from that. That's only, what we're trying to do is get people, and and I think this is important in the LGBTIQA plus community too. We need to constantly critique: where are we racist? Are we Islamophobic? Where are we privileged? Where are we still marginalised? How do we unite to the external, issues, but also critique each other, and allies? What are our roles in doing that as well? And that's that place that we all need to sit at, the intersections of marginality and privilege. And how can we all be allies to each other? I mean, it took some Anglo teachers to point out that I actually had a brain and that I could go to uni, and my parents are like, what? Coming from us? We never went to school. And then off I went.
oh, fantastic. Um, in the pathway of life, I'm sure that you would with this and would have seen this throughout life. You choose the path that you take in all kinds of areas, and particularly in this area that we're talking about now for LGBTIQ rights and so on. You know, people can talk of their history and say, "Oh, we've always opposed this, or we've opposed that, or we've done something else." One of the things that in the current appeal that we've had for quite some time on Chuffed is titled "Choose Love, Not Hate."
Mm.
And when you look at this whole story, there are so many people who have actually chosen, like you have, love. You're choosing a path of acceptance and welcome and celebration of people,
Mm.
of human beings, who are human beings no matter what.
I think
Whereas,
so. Yeah, I
you
try.
agree with that? Yeah,
I
I'm
do.
sure you do.
I try. All of it. I mean, I know that being an ally to AGMC, I've had to learn to curb my anti-religiosity because of
Yeah,
my own experiences with my family being decimated through Catholicism. Women's a whole lot of stuff that is still ongoing. But how am I going to work with Muslim queer? How am I going to work with South Asian, Hindu, etc., Sikh people? I need to develop compassion, understanding, and I need to learn. So that I think all of us, so I've actually had to shift that, remember where I'm coming from, why I feel the way I do, what happened to my ancestors, but at the same time acknowledge that there are people who are really working hard in their spiritual spaces to shift things and to be
absolutely.
invited in to work with Muslim LGBTIQA plus, to write, to research, to be an activist. I need to respect everyone's faith.
Isn't that interesting? I had you probably don't know, but my background, I had about 20 odd years in a religious cult. So,
Oh,
so um, I have a constant thing where I have to rethink. I mean, I'm still very interested in theology and so on. I read
mm,
books on theology and so on. I don't actually attend a church at the moment, but um, there's a tendency in me which is to reject anything that is
yeah,
religious based. And so I have to constantly keep
yep,
thinking, well, there are really good people there, people who
mm,
want to make a difference in the world, and that
mm,
their motivation they've taken from their faith,
yeah,
whether they're Islamic or whether they're
yep,
Buddhist or Hindu or Christian or whatever,
yeah.
or whether they're part of, New Age
Yeah,
religion.
absolutely. I didn't know that, David, and I totally agree. I think it's about how do you hold often contradictory, multiple positions all at the same time. So I can be part of the conversion practice and ideology research team with amazing
Yes,
people like Tim Jones,
yes,
Nathan Despot, um, and I can be part of the Mobs and Wogs, which is another project we're doing with First Nations,
yes.
Mobs and Wogs, Southern Europeans and First
Oh,
Nations.
lovely.
It's getting ready to go to the publisher. We're all very excited. I'm just waiting for final approvals from people. And so and I look at colonization. So I am a colonizer and a colonized. So Italians did atrocious things in North Africa, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, etc. And now in Australia, I am friends with Somalia, Eritrea, and Ethiopian. So understanding, and then I come to this country and we are colonizers as well. So,
Mm.
all those things we have to learn. I think if we're going to be good allies, respect and be accountable, holding all those together.
Oh, absolutely. Now, just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to close the door.
No worries.
Thank you. My wife just came home, and
Oh, say
I'm not
hello.
using headphones. I just needed to close the door. Um, yes. No, that's the constant, um, the constant reevaluating our
Mm,
lives, the
mm,
constant reevaluating who we are, where we are, what we believe is a very important
yeah,
thing about being human, I think.
it is.
Yeah. Now,
Mm,
I've got to say to you that I mentioned the fact that you're based at the Pride Centre. I think the Pride Centre is such a wonderful building
yeah.
and such a wonderful addition to this city. So, would you like to tell people who will get to see this, who haven't been to the Pride Centre, know nothing about it, people from other countries? I've got refugees in Africa
Mm,
who also watch this podcast, and they're queer refugees, so their life is pretty horrible for them,
yeah.
and I think you can give them some encouragement by telling them about the Pride Centre.
Yeah. Look, and I do want to preface that, and hello everyone, because I don't want to come across as, look at us in the West, we've got it all sorted, we're all perfect, we've got this amazing money that we've put towards a Pride Centre. Because most of us, if not all of us, come from cultures and heritages, as I
Mm,
said, in so many ways that have been atrocious, that have actually
mm,
been extremely horrendous to queer people. There's been a lot of learning,
mm,
a lot lost, and hopefully we're going to keep going. But if you ever get a chance, the Victorian Pride Centre is amazing. It's a massive building, and there are concerns, of course, from diverse communities, but the point is we are all in one space. So I'm there with the AGMC office, Joy FM, Thorn Harbour Health, Koori Pride. So it's a place of joy, safety, places to chat. There's the Hares and Hyenas bookshop. Yes, I love that bookshop. I raised my daughter on a lot of those books, and now she's handing them over to her baby. So I just like, it's a place where you can even just sit and look at the artworks. We had a wonderful queer refugee art exhibition, photography exhibition, not that long ago. David, you'd remember. So
it
I
was
think we
wonderful.
need places like that. And yes, we are lucky to be in a country where we can put money towards that. But I think everyone needs to find some kind of safety in place. And also, if someone feels excluded from the Victoria Pride Centre, then we need to have those conversations. We need to understand how the different, the people who are running the place, the community groups, we pay rent. We should be paying a bigger rent to First Peoples. We've got an incredible space. So please, everyone, come and have a look, because what I love is that you can just sit in the foyer, which I don't call a foyer. It's like a beautiful open area, and being greeted with warmth, greeted with love, grab a coffee, hang out, go to the bookshop, or you can have events there or wander around and see the different offices. Switchboard is there, Joy FM, the archives, historical queer archives are there. One of my favourite places. It's amazing.
When you
And
think
-18. Let's not forget the -18s. We've got a great...
Tell people what the -18 stand for.
Yeah, -18 is, this is something that I think so many older queer communities wish they'd had. This is groups for young people who are under 18. And they run their own events, they have their own leadership groups, and they're mentored and also led by people who are over 18, who got too old, but now they can take positions of support and leadership, and with wonderful government grants. And they do really incredible work to support young people at the ages where things could get extremely difficult. And it's like, no, this is the time. We're going to do good stuff together. We're going to keep... And I love younger people. They are the most active. They're the most, for me, around a whole range of issues. They've really got it, because they're starting from a different baseline, David, and they're moving on. The only thing I would say is we ask them, especially working with people like Samo and Fafafine Amal, and a lot of older people, especially from Transgender Victoria, don't forget whose shoulders you are on, and don't forget what people have been through to get you to this point. You're their legacy. Carry it forward, but respect your elders. And remember, they started from a very different position.
Yeah, absolutely. The world has changed in, I'm nearly up to 7 decades, so that's a lot of change that I've seen from a world that was very, very much more oppressive to what we now call the LGBTIQ community. And yet it wasn't to the extent that it is now in places like Uganda, where Humanity in Need is working, and in Kenya, and in some other parts of the world. Maria, I'd love to talk to you again at another time, but I'd like to finish today by asking you, what do you think is the next major battle to be fought in this space? And I think I know where you'll go with that, but I'd just love to hear it from you.
Yeah. Wow, there's so many. I think one of them would be two parts to this. To be aware that there are some far-right movements coming in, to be aware that, for example, when I started teaching in women's studies, it was called back then in the 90s, the idea that a woman had to be biologically born is something we were actually critiquing. Now we've got trans-exclusionary feminists. So just to be aware that as we gain more rights, as allies increase, as we come to more understanding and compassion and empathy and celebration of human diversity, there are going to be groups that are going to try and hold it back. And I think what's coming forward for us is to keep going. Keep in mind that the very reason they're doing this is because it's going, it's shifting. And also the other thing for me is to somehow, the mainstream media really needs to be more accountable to how much space they're giving these minority voices, and the impact that it's having. So, for example, that Christian group that's predominantly Lebanese or Coptic, I can't remember, sorry, but I know that we are working with so many Lebanese people who love their LGBT children, who are... Sekna Hamoud is one of the best Muslim counsellors who's rescued so many Muslim young people, LGBTIQ young people. So for me, the issue going forward is not to pander to the publicity that these neo-Nazi, a whole lot of movements are coming forward, because you know what, that's actually a sign that they know it's all going. And it's like they're trying to hang on to what's not going to be there in another generation. Yeah. I'm very hopeful.
I'm hopeful too. I think I'm extremely hopeful because I think we've made great progress, but I think there's much to be made. But it's hard to imagine, isn't it, Maria, that when you go back, I go back in my life and you go back in yours, and you would have memories of tough times behind your family, and think that we would actually have to bring in laws to ban the swastika, except in I mean, I can't believe it. But
I know,
of course it's there.
And the ramifications, as you said, it's. I think the other thing that for us going forward is understanding that this is not a silo LGBTIQ plus issues. This is not a migration issue, a refugee issue, an Islamophobic issue. That we're all intersecting, and they're all intersecting. So when I think of the swastika, of course, the Holocaust, all those narratives, right wing, the destruction of LGBTIQ people in Nazi Germany and elsewhere. But for me, it's also the ramifications of what happened in my country of heritage, Italy. We forget Mussolini decimated Jews, rounded up queer people, the whole works. But then also now, seeing a swastika on television, my mother-in-law, who grew up in Friuli, this may be problematic for your audience, but who had a gun held to her head as a child by a Nazi soldier, seeing that swastika is, at 90, is raising a whole lot of stuff. So these are social. These are social issues, not just a queer issue, a racist issue. We are all implicated. We all have to have a voice, and we all have to understand that our histories are interconnected. Can I say, you do so much great work in diverse African countries. The impact colonialism has had on understandings of genders and sexualities in Southeast Asian, South Asian, African countries. And now you've got leaders who are neo-colonial, as Kwame Nkrumah once said. Neo-colonialism is where they're still climbing that ladder by hanging on to colonial constructs that weren't there in their original cultures.
No. And yet it's a fake news thing. That term was introduced by that very unimportant man in America who caused so much damage. But when you think of it, they now claim, of course, that the West is introducing the problems of LGBTQ people and others and so on. It's a lie. It's an absolute lie.
And we have the research. And David, we have the research. One of the other issues that I think going forward, and as I said, I sit within academia and not. I want to be an activist, an ally, and an advocate and academic because I love researching. But we've also got to make our work accessible. We need to, work with people to say, this is your history, and I'm not going to give you a book to read. I'm not going to give you stuff that you may not even be literate in your own language as a refugee coming to Australia. But how do we get together and have these conversations about all our histories, all our heritages, and going forward? And this is where I think the future is leading. I think young people, again, even around First Nations issues, are starting from a very different base. And the decolonising is going on everywhere. Again, subjectively referring to my own heritage, the number of young Italian scholars who are interrogating what we did in Libya, in North Africa, chemical warfare, genocide, things that have been hidden by the Italian government for too long, is all coming forward. And these are young scholars, often Somali Italian. We had a stolen generation, David. Italy stole children. So this is something that I think the future is going to see. Going back to your question, I think this is where the future is heading. More and more people are going to want access to information, not fake news.
Yes.
They're going to want access to what do I do with this information? How do I use it to create more and more social justice?
Yeah, wonderful. And what can we do with that information to choose to be more compassionate and more empathetic and more kind to one another in our world?
Absolutely. So, yeah, and as I said, I'm about to head off to the airport after this, eventually after the next meeting. But, I'm going to sit in a taxi, and the likelihood is that it's going to be a Somali or Eritrean or Ethiopian.
Yes.
The conversation, not where you're from, but, hey, what's your cultural heritage? They'll ask mine. And then we suddenly realize our ancestors met in a war. And how do we work? How do we navigate that? And then conversations can open up around LGBT. Conversations can open up around equity and refugees. This class thing, taxi driver, academic, there are points of connection, and if we could all find those points of connection. Usually I apologize, especially when they talk Italian better than me, and I go, oh dear, that was imposed on you. And they're like, yeah.
There are wonderful things in your heritage, as there are in mine, but there's also terrible sadness.
Terrible.
And look at what the ancestors in Australia did to our First Nations people, and we're only coming to the point of seriously addressing that now, and yet there is still voice being raised against the voice. Isn't it incredible?
I know. Yeah,
Maria, I really want to thank you very much for joining me today. Love to have you again on another occasion. So we'll keep in touch, and
definitely.
I look forward to actually catching up with you again soon.
Thank you so much, David. And hello, everyone, and thank you so much.
Please don't forget to support the podcast through Patreon, other sources, or direct to our website. This podcast supports refugees who are suffering terribly in Africa because of religious hate. It's time to show them some love.